There is one group, though, that has a bit to say about this, and it's YIMBY, which stands for Yes in My Backyard. It's a group that advocates for more homes being built where people want to live. Got a lot of traction in Sydney and Melbourne. We're starting to see it in other parts of the country too. Jonathan O'Brien is from YIMBY Melbourne and he's with us now. Jono, thank you very much for coming on. Firstly, we've been just talking about migration. The Coalition wants to slash immigration to get more young people into housing. What's your take on this?
Yeah, look, I don't think that the substitute for economically damaging housing policies is an economically damaging migration policy, right? I think the idea that somehow Australia is not able to build a lot of housing just doesn't seem to hold up. We used to build a lot more homes up until the 1970s per capita, and it doesn't strike me that there's any reason we couldn't do that again.
We've been talking a little bit about some of the pressures. Like yesterday, we were talking about apprentices and getting more people into construction and skilled up in that area to be able to build more homes. What do you think in terms of the major cities, places like Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Perth? Like, what should they be doing to help that housing crisis?
Yeah, look, the number one thing that state governments can do on this is simply make it legal to build more houses in more places. In so much of our inner cities, especially in a Sydney and in a Melbourne, but especially in a Sydney, it is pretty much illegal to build more than 2 or 3 stories of housing. And that is a huge problem when these are places, you know, the closest to jobs, closest to communities, closest to the amenities that people care about.
You're talking about obviously a lot of issues that are state government focused, also related to local government. Is there anything that you think needs to be happening at a federal level?
Look, the federal government have all the money and they have this thing sort of called the National Productivity Fund, and they can use the fact that they collect most of the tax dollars to tell the states to sort of hurry up on this kind of stuff. The federal government also, by virtue of having a lot of money, can do targeted infrastructure unlocks. Now, both major parties have policies around that, and that's really good. You mentioned apprentices. One big thing that people don't really realize is that right now, skilled tradies can't operate across state borders. So a big thing the feds can do, and they're starting to do this, is ensure that people can kind of move between states to where they're most needed to build the houses people most want. And then some other quick stuff is just around boosting Commonwealth rent assistance, creating better incentives for public, community and youth housing to ensure that we're building the homes for people at the very bottom end, the people who need the help the most.
Your group, YIMBY, it's obviously the opposite of NIMBY, which is an acronym for Not in My Backyard, basically refers to people, residents who are opposed to real estate development, infrastructure developments in their area. What do you say to those who are kind of genuinely worried about their suburbs, their homes, communities changing too much, who say, yeah, development's a good thing, but too much of it can really ruin an area, and once we do it, we can't take it back?
Yeah, look, I think the real problem that we've had in our community consultation kind of regime of the last 50 years is that we've given this full voice to the landowning incumbents who live in an area. And the voice we have completely shut out and completely ignored until the YIMBY movement started to organize around our cities is the voice of the people who want to live somewhere but can't. Those people have been shut out of our conversations systematically, and they are the biggest stakeholder in new housing developments. So I really think we need to rebalance. Think about, okay, well, actually, is the local right to be asked what you think? Does that quote unquote right strip out and away and ahead of the fundamental human need for housing? Like, that's a real question, right? And, you know, we can talk about community rights all day, but really what we should be talking about is, well, how do we actually let people live where they want to live? That's a sign of a really well-functioning city. And I think we should be measuring on that rather than whether a whole bunch of old geezers got hurt at the town hall. This kind of idea that first and foremost, some areas should be museums is kind of absurd. And the idea that we can't today build the great monuments of tomorrow because there's a cottage from 100 years ago, of which there are dozens that look identical, that have been locked up under sort of some arbitrary set of planning controls, I don't think is a way to build a city that thrives for, 100 years to come.
Well, look, thank you very much for coming on and sharing some of your thoughts, explaining exactly what your movement is all about. Jonathan O'Brien from YIMBY Melbourne, appreciate you coming on.
Thank you so much for having me.
And if